Is Sudan witnessing the birth of a new nation or the return to an old war? Sudan, where Arabia meets Africa, endured the continent's longest civil war. It ended in 2005 with the internationally brokered Comprehensive Peace Agreement. That led to complex national elections in April 2010, which confirmed the dominance of President Omar al-Bashir in the north and President Salva Kiir in the south. The north is largely Muslim and the south Christian or animist. The 2005 peace agreement stipulated a referendum in the south to decide on unity or secession. It was held over 7 days in January 2011. 3.9 million of the estimated 8 million Southerners registered to vote. To achieve independence, at least 50% of the registered voters had to say yes, provided at least 60% of the registered voters turned out. In the event, there was a massive turnout, with almost 99% expected to vote for an independent South Sudan. Official results will be announced in mid-February. Except for isolated incidents, the voting was peaceful. The voters showed patience and commitment as they queued in the heat or walked miles to isolated polling stations. According to international observers, the polling was largely free and fair. Voting by Southerners in the north was very low compared with the south, but an estimated 180,000 Southerners made their way home by road or river to vote in their homeland. While endorsing the process, international observers did note some problems with voter registration, especially eligibility to vote, and a lack of voter education. Much assisted voting was recorded, although this was usually well-intentioned because of the very high levels of illiteracy in the South. Many examples of security officials, especially police, being present inside the polling centers were also recorded. Nevertheless, it was absolutely clear that Southerners voted en masse and freely, often passionately, for independence. The referendum may have displayed the passionate desire for independence, but it also showed the shortcomings of the fledgling government of South Sudan. Southerners living in the north, 2 to 3 million, had fled during the decades of war, were urged by the southern government to return home. Thousands came by river along the White Nile. The grueling journey usually took 2.5 weeks. When they got to Juba port, many were exhausted and some, especially children, were ill. In some cases, clergymen brought their congregations with them.
I was there in Khartoum actually 22 years. They have relatives here, and then others they don't have relatives. And then if you see the situation here now, you see, others they don't have something to eat even, or really need their help.
Some came for individual patriotic reasons.
But we want to return back to our motherland because this is our country. We can't leave our country like this.
This 84-year-old lady was crying with joy to come back to the land she had last seen in 1949. Despite having to camp at the port, most were glad to be home, but complained about the lack of support from the government in the southern capital of Juba. The government did respond by setting up mobile clinics. But jobs and homes for the many returnees will still have to be found in one of the poorest regions of Africa. Nevertheless, none of the Southerners interviewed said they left because of pressure on them to do so. Many Northerners, often Muslim businessmen, chose to return to the north, either temporarily during the referendum, fearing rioting or looting, or in some cases left permanently. Many shops in the Muslim business area of Juba had shut during the referendum. The businessmen said that no local pressure had been put on them, although some had returned to Khartoum because of concerns among their relatives in the north.
Me, I am a businessman. I do my business anywhere. There is no problem for me. Maybe they're afraid, but there is nothing. I am still here. I am still here, and I live here, and I do my business here. I have 3 wives, one from south of Sudan, and one from center of Sudan, and one from west of Sudan. I'm Sudanese.
But other northern businessmen, many who had lived in the south for their whole lives, claimed that up to 5,000 merchants in the countryside outside Juba had not been allowed to get back their farms and shops, which had been seized by the SPLA, the Sudan People's Liberation Army.
Myself, I lost more than $50 million, and they looting anything, goods, all the goods and cars and tractors. They looting since the war.
Southern Sudan is scheduled to become independent in July 2011 as Africa's 54th state, but many problems remain. The country is desperately underdeveloped, with less than 40 miles of tarred roads. 90% of the inhabitants live on less than $1 a day. Half require food aid. Corruption is endemic, and half of the budget has been spent on weapons. The key issue is a settled border. Disputes, particularly over Abyei, still fester. Arguments over sharing the national debt have not been resolved. Nor has citizenship been resolved. This could become paramount to prevent the mass exodus of Southerners in the north and vice versa. Southern Sudan is almost totally dependent on the oil. 80% of the proven reserves lie in the south. But the pipelines to the sea from the landlocked south run through northern Sudan. Peaceful cooperation makes sense. Talk of building alternative pipelines through difficult terrain to the sea via Kenya do not make sense because of the high costs and the probability that southern oil output will soon peak and then decline rapidly. Border disputes could spark off war by accident. Much depends on the attitude of Khartoum, which loses 1/3 of its territory and much of its oil revenue. Some northerners are relieved to be rid of the burden of the long southern war, while the war in the west, Darfur, continues. Others fear that the north will become a harsh Islamist police state, whether or not Omar al-Bashir survives a rumored coup. Even if a resumption of war is avoided, South Sudan has to contend with numerous difficulties, not least the crises of expectations of its people.
I don't know why people call us the poorest people in Africa when we have oil reserve under the surface of our soil, and we have got other minerals, and we have the green land, agricultural land. I don't know why people continue to call us poor. Why?
Tribal clashes led by dissident warlords are also to be expected. So will South Sudan become a democratic state? Dr. Lam Akol is the leader of the group of small opposition parties who are challenging the dominant SPLM.
The South is made up of a number of political parties, a number of tribes, a number of different religious groups. So it has to mold together all these diversities so that it can become a strong nascent state. The way to do this, of course, is to start with a national broad-based government that represents all the political parties.
The referendum was peaceful. So might be the reactions of the North. The state will be recognized, not least by their African neighbors. Nevertheless, a successful breakaway worries the African Union, which faces separatist movements throughout Africa. The UN and other international agencies have helped in the independence process. A new nation is about to be born, but whether it heralds peace in a very troubled region depends finally on the wisdom of the politicians in Khartoum and Juba, and not the diplomacy of the AU, China, or the United States.